I'm Margaret Lowe, and I'm president of AtlanticLIVE, and we bring the Atlantic's journalism to life on stages across the country. And we are so happy to be here in San Francisco to talk about tech, where the industry has moved in 2018 and where we are going in 2019 and beyond. In other words, we're going to be talking about what's next. This past year, we saw advances in artificial intelligence, in neural networks, and mobility. And we also saw some of the biggest names in tech come under intense scrutiny. There are serious questions about privacy, data, and whether the tech companies can or should police facts and speech. And at the same time, I think we're all wondering how technology is affecting our humanity. In what ways is it making our lives better? And on the flip side, how is it changing us, dividing us, and in some ways isolating us from one another? This is certainly familiar territory to everybody in this room, but also worthy of exploration. And we're going to be talking about all of these issues tonight and take a look into the virtual crystal ball. Before we kick off, I want to thank our underwriters because they made tonight possible, and they are Google, PayPal, and our presenting underwriter, Boeing. And with that, I am ever so delighted to introduce Boeing's Vice President of Enterprise Strategy. Please join me in welcoming Travis Sullivan. He's here to say a few words. Travis?
Well, thank you, Margaret. And on behalf of Boeing, it is my honor and privilege to welcome you, everyone in this room, and everyone streaming in from around the world to this What's Next session, looking out ahead at the breakthroughs that we expect to define our future. I'm especially excited about this series as part of my job and that of my team is to look out at what's new and what's next for Boeing and for the aerospace industry at large. And when we do look out, we see an exciting future ahead. We see technologies like 5G, IoT, 3D printing, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, data analytics, all of these as transformative. And applying these technologies into aerospace applications like urban mobility, connectivity, and space travel are just a few ways Boeing is transforming how we connect with the world around us, from the depths of the ocean and into space and all the altitude in between. We at Boeing are also particularly proud to be part of the innovation community here in Northern California. We've just recently opened an office in the Valley, where we have one of our new teams, Horizon X, that is blazing a trail and challenging what's possible. We're rethinking how and where we do business. And through our Horizon X Ventures CVC, we're investing in innovative startups with technologies and solutions that can shape the future of factories and flight. Through these investments and many others across Boeing, we're building the next generation of urban, regional, and global mobility, developing aircraft and shaping the airspace for a safe and reliably connected transport world. Boeing is proud that over the last 100 years, we have defined air travel as you know it. But we didn't do it alone. As we look ahead to our next century, it will be no different. I know that we at Boeing are working with some of you in this room and in the crowd tonight, and we are excited to be your partners. And I'm sure there will be others in this room and many others streaming from around the world that will be our partners in the years to come. We look forward to continued work together and future work together as we collaboratively define what that future looks like. Because folks, the future is being built right now. And we at Boeing are excited about where things are headed. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to a terrific evening with a fascinating speaker and a great panel. Thank you very much. Margaret.
Thank you so much, Travis. And by the way, everybody should stick around afterwards and check out Boeing's very cool interactive exhibit. We will keep the bar open, and you can experience what's next in mobility and flight. And now, a few practical notes. Please silence your cell phones, but don't put them away because we are on Twitter at AtlanticLIVE. The hashtag is What's Next SF. What's Next SF. And we, of course, want you to be part of the conversation in the room, too, so we'll leave time for your questions across the evening. And now, Let's roll. We begin with entrepreneur and investor Alexis Ohanian. He co-founded the social news site Reddit when he was in his early 20s and is now the company's executive chair. He's also making seed investments in startups as managing partner of Initialized Capital, a firm he also co-founded. And he's here with my colleague, Atlantic staff writer Alexis Madrigal, to talk about the search for the next big thing and all the other weighty issues of the day. And it gives me enormous pleasure to say, Alexis and Alexis, the floor is yours.
I love hearing it. Thank you.
What's even funnier is Alexis and I have known each other for a very long time. At the very beginning of my journalism career, we worked on Bryant Street, which was Wired Magazine's offices, which also housed, through some weird financial arrangement, Reddit.
Yeah, we had a little terrarium in the corner.
They really did.
And
they really did. All the journalists would look
there.
at it oh, look at what are they doing in there?
What are those nerds doing in there? But
It was always something weird, in case you were wondering.
It was. And I took a particular point of pride in meeting you and knowing that there were only 2 Alexises on that floor, both of whom were male. That's right. And I love meeting a fellow male Alexis who embraces the name.
That's right.
Because you meet the ones who are like, call me Al or call me Alex. And it's like, what are you doing? Own it.
Yeah,
you love
own
the
it.
name.
This
Love
is our
who
name.
you are. And so it's much respect.
We're going to talk the future of tech, but does anyone here know why our name became a name more associated with women? There's a particular moment in time, and it was when Joan Collins was the star of Dynasty.
Mm-hmm. It was
And
Dynasty.
it was the number. They ran it
Check the
twice a
numbers.
week, and it was number 1 and number 3 in the ratings every week. So that's when it happened. I was in Mexico. I was born in Mexico, and my parents just didn't know. What's your excuse?
What year was that? I feel like it was in the 80s.
It was in the 80s.
It was late. So I was born in 83, and in that year, my father was a big fan of boxing. He had been for a decade. And Alexis Arguello,
no way,
Nicaraguan boxer, was my father's favorite fighter. And he said, I'm naming you after Alexis Arguello. Because obviously, for the rest of your life, people will just assume you were named after this Nicaraguan boxer.
And not Joan Collins.
And not Joan Collins.
Yeah.
So it goes. But yeah.
I'm still in that story, actually. That's what I was named.
Isn't
I was
it
also
again?
named after Alexis Arguello.
He was a hell of a
Great Nicaraguan.
dude, hell of a fighter. Tragic life in the end there, but a hell of a fighter and a gentleman fighter. No, I'm serious. I know it seems oxymoronic, but Google it. He was known for being a really sort of gentlemanly good guy.
Let's talk about technology.
Yeah. Okay.
So you've long been obsessed with the sort of democratizing potential of the internet.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? And in 2013, you published a book called Without Their Permission.
Yep.
And I just want to quote you one line, which was your summary for the book.
Okay.
There's a unifying message here. The internet is already doing awesome things, and it's just in its infancy. Do you still believe both parts of that statement?
Do I believe the internet is still in its infancy? Yes, I do. Do I believe it is still doing awesome things? Yes, I do. Do I think, though, that there are also, I mean, what set up this whole question, that there are also costs associated with that the platform can provide or produce? Absolutely. And I think that's the thing. The thing that's most frustrating for me now is I wish we were able to have a thoughtful discussion about it, about the technology, about the implications of it at a higher level, at a societal level, at a level in the halls of Congress that I would be proud of, but we're very far from that. And there are implications here, not just about the future of media, but the future of work with artificial intelligence and likewise, that are happening right now that we're not having intelligent, thoughtful, good, real conversations about. But I do still believe in the long-term potential. I do still think we're in the infancy.
Do you think there are things, like, is it fair to call your book like Techno utopian from that time?
Mildly, yes. I mean, I do. The last chapter is a dystopian future of what it could look like if we don't do the right things. So I had my backup plan there.
Got it.
But yes, I mean, I still am. I'm an optimist. I wouldn't say I'm a techno-utopian on that level, but very optimistic about technology and what it can do. Because I've certainly benefited from it, and I've seen how it can affect, in positive ways, remarkable change and remarkable good. And I do think that if we are good stewards of it, it is a net positive on society. I think there is so much good that can come from it. And without their permission is not about breaking laws. It's about this idea that if you have a great idea, the internet can be an enabling platform for you to execute on it, whether it's a startup or a nonprofit, or even just get inspired enough to create something a little better. Because I do think that great ideas are global, and when the internet is at its best, we can benefit from all those global ideas.
Do you think that if people had begun to reckon with the darker aspects of the internet earlier, do you think things would have actually changed, or was the technological push so strong that even if, back in 2013, you started to think about the way that hate speech could work on your platform and others, do you think it would have made a difference?
I ultimately don't think so, because the nature of the internet allows for ingenuity for good or bad. And so had all of the major platforms just said, look, tomorrow Facebook's only going to have kitten photos, nothing else, some other platform would have been created. Maybe it wouldn't have even been created here in the United States. It would have been created somewhere else, but because of the World Wide Web, would have been accessible, would have congregated. We're seeing platforms like this. We've seen them come and go. Vote was probably the most extreme version of this, which was a place that when I came back to Reddit in 2014, we started aggressively banning communities and updating our content policy to be to where it certainly should have never gone, or to get it back away from where it should have never gone while we were away. And those communities all went to this site called Vote, which was like an even uglier, worse looking version of Reddit. I think it was based and operated in Switzerland. But the reality is those communities, those platforms, those technologies would have been created somewhere. But I think that's a byproduct of us as humans. And the part that I think biologically, we as people were not really well equipped to confront such a breadth of ideas. We were used to, for a very long time, being surrounded by the people immediately around us, our families, and then more broadly sort of our clans or our tribes. And modern technology, communication, travel started to bring us more in connection with one another, but not in a meaningful, significant way like social media has, where now you really can, in real time, get exposed to ideas that are sometimes reprehensible, but that were always happening around dinner tables, just ones we weren't sitting at. And I do think there is an opportunity, and this is the challenge that we have as a society, and I no longer am at Reddit, but that platforms have too, to help create more good conversation, because I don't think the alternative is viable. I do think a lot of this happens because of ignorance and because of isolation, and I think creating more conversation and realizing we do actually have more in common than not, and reducing some of that ignorance can be what social media does triumphantly that it couldn't before. And those are the stories that come up, right? Are the ones that give us hope are the ones for the homosexual kid in the middle of you can pick where, feeling isolated, feeling alone, being able to find community and find normalcy and find ideas that might be very contentious and very problematic in their geographic vicinity, but because of the internet can find common ground and realize that what is maybe not a social norm or even accepted or even tolerated is actually. The flip side is, of course, an idea that we do think is socially wrong or problematic can find a home for other people who agree that, yes, these really problematic things are actually normal.
Sometimes I think that the original sin wasn't so much connection or social media, but was actually the concept of virality. Because in a lot of cases, people are, in fact, just talking with people they know, but kind of randomly and with unpredictable consequences, people get suddenly elevated into a realm where tens of millions of people know who they are after no one knew who they were, the week before. And so it provides a really strange and unpredictable avenue for ideas and people to be elevated out of obscurity when maybe those ideas weren't actually ready. They were just things that people were talking about. And instead, now they're being promoted to tens of millions of people.
And the content that does better algorithmically on most of these platforms is the stuff that is quick to consume and easy to share.
Yep.
And plays to one's sort of tribe or followers, which does oftentimes bring out, plenty of times it is cat photos, but it also brings out really problematic, hateful things.
Yeah. So given the current shape of the internet with a lot of power concentrated in the hands of a few platforms, certainly relative to 10 or 15 years ago, what do you think a 22-year-old Alexis Ohanian, leaving the University of Virginia would be doing right now?
What would I be doing right now? I think I really do believe that we've reached a kind of peak social where the old model of following individuals has to a certain extent run its course, where, I mean, it's not going to go away, but I do think we're now at a point where, because of all those mechanisms you were talking about, what people are craving more than ever are real senses of community. And I think we're going to see a retreat and a withdrawal to platforms, probably new and emerging ones or others that exist now, that are places for people to feel like they are united by, whether it's a passion over their favorite esports team or whether, I mean, we invested in a company called Girl Boss where they have a massive community of millennial, mostly women, who are young professionals who want this sense of shared identity and community and want an online home that's not LinkedIn to come together and talk about everything from negotiating a higher salary to whatever they want to, I don't know, what their plans are for the weekend. And so I think, again, as an optimist, I think that is great because in most cases it will enable a bunch of new platforms to come up to give people those spaces to feel empowered and enabled and safe. The downside of it is like those other communities we find reprehensible are going to find other places to go. They're going to find other platforms that are probably more underground than not. And when this stuff works well, it enables someone to see a perspective they wouldn't normally see in a way that demystifies something they normally find scary, frankly. And this is that crossover point that I think we'll have to figure out. And so what would a 22-year-old version of me do? Probably build some version of that platform. I don't know what that looks like. There are different people attacking it from different specific verticals and communities, but I think there's another iteration that's to come. I mean, Discord has got its world and its own issues. There's Telegram and other sort of mobile-based ones. I mean, Slack even is a version of this.
Do you think Facebook, which has been talking about how they're trying to build tools for community, has any chance of becoming that?
No, I think well, because I think one, they're not incentivized.
Not that Reddit people have always hated Facebook people, but
no, I mean, yes, because I am still a shareholder in Reddit, and so I have a bias here. But Facebook groups is not a it's not a priority for Facebook. I mean, look, Instagram still has tremendous growth. I feel like all of the energy, all of the hardest working, best sort of all the energy in the company, those people are focused on Instagram and WhatsApp. And so I don't see a lot of hope for innovation on the Facebook product. Maybe, groups, if anything else, has been an indicator for startups that I meet now and Initialized who are saying, look, these Facebook groups exist just to talk about blah, and it's amazing. And it's like an accident that they're thriving. We want to build a platform for this community because Facebook groups is like an ugly hack. Like it's just working, and it's a miracle it's working, but it's a really good signal that people want this, so we're building the platform ourselves, specifically for this community to talk about whatever it is they're into.
Do you think it's possible that social media in 10 years, we'll look back on this era and we'll just be like, that was a mistake? Like technology companies have moved on. They've done other things. We've got, in 10 years, maybe we'll have self-driving cars, self-flying helicopters, whatever it is. But you know what? Posting everything all the time? No, not doing it anymore. I
think there will be behaviors that will look antiquated and weird. But on the whole, I don't see how the genie goes back in the bottle. I think it evolves in the same way that, like, I'm sure there were a bunch of people, first they started printing Bibles, but then I'm sure they were printing pornography at some point. Some actual historian can verify that. And they were probably like, oh, what are the Germans like? What a disaster. This was for Bibles. And my mom was German, so I do a pretty good German accent.
I'm glad you went with the German. It was
yeah. And so they were probably really upset because they're like, this was for Bibles. And yeah, there was a bunch of smut, and then there was evolution. I guess that still exists, but the medium adapted and evolved, and I think I think, yeah, there are going to be behaviors we're going to look at and be like, well, that was dumb, and that was a bad idea. But the overall social media, that's not going away. I mean, this is the means through which media is being shared digitally, and it's not going back, but it is evolving. I do believe that.
It's just been interesting because if you would have looked at the model for a social network, 5 years ago, it was like you put everything that you do into this space, your pictures, your messages, your thoughts. And now the most popular emerging platforms are all about messaging, and they're all about like private, semi-private, and disappearing messages, not like...
Or karaoke.
Or karaoke. Yeah, right.
TikTok.
Yeah.
On TikTok? No, your kids are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To the genie going back in the bottle question, though, how many people here have deleted a social network or an account, like an app off your phone or an account?
Okay, but Facebook doesn't count. If you're, see, yeah, exactly.
It's an interesting question. Let's talk about some of your other investment theses at Initialized. What are you most excited to be investing in right now?
I really selfishly want technology to be that good force that I know it can. And we're still, at the end of the day, we're not social impact investors. I'm not going to try to lie like we are. But I do think we have a front row seat to new technology. And so I know we talked a little about AI stuff early on. Like we reached the turning point in the last year and a half, 2 years, where the technology, the hardware required to do really impressive, intensive processing got cheap enough. The software, the libraries, the things people were building on were good enough. And frankly, even like off-the-shelf cameras were cheap enough and good enough, thank you, China, that we can do amazing things right now with computer vision. There are companies right now that are effectively teaching robots how to see in very meaningful ways, everything from self-driving cars to you can visit the standard market on Market Street, where it's basically a 7-Eleven where you don't need to check out. You just take the Coca-Cola and you walk out. And that is happening right now. And it's an amazing user experience, and I believe there is a net positive impact on society because it's an easier way to shop, and frankly, it's kind of fun. But there's a real impact there because a ton of jobs, and my first job was in retail, CompUSA, a ton of jobs are going to be decimated because the amount of labor needed for that work is probably going to be like a tenth of what it was historically. And then you look into food service and restaurants, and that's another one. My second job was at Pizza Hut. I feel a kinship to these, where you're talking about, a significant portion of the American population, tens of millions of people in these two industries, where those jobs will be decimated, and it is a net positive on society. I do think it overall allows for better service, it's a better experience, but the repercussions of this are things that we're not at all prepared for. So while
honestly, it sounds like a net negative. It sounds like a positive for the consumer and a negative for society.
I do believe that the jobs that are, and so you've probably seen this chart. If you haven't, Google it. I'm sure the Atlantic's done an article on it. If you look at job growth for routine work, so whether it is manual labor, like physical labor or cognitive labor, routine work jobs have basically been flat since the recession. There's been a little bit of growth, but not much. And historically, not too much even before that. The non-routine work, whether it is cognitive or whether it is manual, so whether you're a software engineer or you're a barber, those jobs continue to grow. And that story, for me, is the story of the next couple of decades, where AI, where software and hardware, is going to keep doing those jobs that are non-routine better, cheaper, faster. And I deeply believe those jobs are not satisfying jobs because they are routine work. Whereas the non-routine jobs, like I said, whether it's a software engineer or a barber or a plumber or a welder, require you to have to make creative, very human decisions, or require you to be empathetic, right? I have no worries about a robot ever doing my sister's job. She's a nurse. Because if a robot were ever capable of doing a nurse's job, the robot would just say, fuck it. I'm not doing this. Like, this is no way in hell, right? There are things that require an amount of human empathy that I believe will always be the realm of humans. And so what gets me excited is, one, investing, yes, in the companies that are going to, in many ways, reduce the amount of these routine jobs by making something better, cheaper, faster through technology, but also investing in companies that are enabling this non-routine work that humans are just better at, that we get more satisfaction from because they are mentally stimulating, because your job entails solving a problem, or if you're my barber, like solving lots of problems and dealing with a therapy session and doing all the things an amazing barber does, right? Those are uniquely human jobs that I do think give us more fulfillment. And I think it is a net positive on society in the long term because it means more humans doing more fulfilling jobs. But in the short term, if we're worried about a few coworkers upset about their minds being shut down, we're talking about millions and millions of workers in cities upset because those jobs are shut down. And that's the part we're not anticipating, we're not talking about, we're not thinking about. And unfortunately, it's not a what if, it's like it is literally happening now.
So I want to talk a little bit about a little sideline into the culture of technology. You've done some interesting public thinking about masculinity, and I wanted to ask, how has being married to Serena Williams changed the way you think about being a man in technology? In this industry, which is notoriously...
It's a problematic industry. And let's be honest, you all are here because I'm married to Serena Williams. But
I mean,
I know, I get it. God, how many billion-dollar companies a guy got to found? But that's fine. I get it. She's the greatest, and so I think. Look, it has. I don't want to. I'd be lying if I said it didn't change my view at all. But I do think that it has helped me in new ways really come to appreciate the opportunities and advantages I have. And this is not something I don't think there was ever one in particular realization. I think the biggest moment for me was realizing, we had a pretty strong parental leave policy at Reddit that I was very happy to take because at the time, I just wanted to spend time with my wife and kid. And I was like, great, 16 weeks. I'm going to tell everyone about it because I want other men in this industry to take this time off. And then she had all the complications she had after the birth. And I saw what it was for us, for her, for everything, how traumatic that was, knowing we had all of the benefits we had, financially, emotionally, structurally, family, we had everything going for us, and it was still an awful trauma I would not want to put any parent through. And it was then that I upon this all happening, really started talking to people who had been campaigning for a national leave policy in this country. And I learned that we didn't actually have one. I very naively just thought oh yeah, this is something every startup does.
What kind of dumb country wouldn't have a parental leave policy? That's a good question.
The only developed one that doesn't. And it's sad that it is this way, but until it really affected me, I wasn't aware of it. It's not that I didn't care. We had a policy just because Caitlin Holloway, who's our VP of People and Culture at Reddit, was just this is the right thing to do. And I was like, great, this sounds like the right thing to do. But it wasn't until scratching the surface and then having it really affect us that we started digging in. And I mean, the most appalling statistic is that 1 in 4 American women are back to work 2 weeks after having a child in this country. And to think that is something that we have become okay with is appalling. And the only thing that has given me hope now in the last few months is that the more people I've talked to in DC about this, the more I am convinced that it is actually a bipartisan issue. Because there are Republicans who deeply believe in family values and certainly talk about how much the GOP prides family as the bedrock of society. What a great way to show it than having a national policy. But there actually is support on both sides. And obviously progressives are in favor of this, but there actually is support on both sides.
Get your questions ready, by the way. Coming to you in just a sec.
And so that was the thing, more than anything else, I think really being a father helped. But look, I've been in interracial relationships. I think the biggest advantage that I try to tell so I've been in other interracial relationships, but I've never had to see what I see now because obviously my wife is famous and I see this on social media. I see it at a whole nother level of a sort of lens into what her life is like. And even before seeing it on 11, the moments where I found myself sort of checked and given a perspective that made me really uncomfortable, because I feel like I'm a good person, right? I don't think of myself as I don't think of myself as a racist or a sexist, and I think a lot of people, what we're confronting now as white guys is this. It is a poking that I think when it's at its best gets interpreted, and I encourage, whenever I get the chance to talk about it, I encourage it to I think of it a lot like being in the gym and you're trying to push a new weight.
In the racial gym, you're just, getting in there.
No, you're in a gym, right? And you're trying to push another level of weight, and it hurts. It hurts that your muscles are tearing because that pain is letting you know that, like, this is growth. This is where you're hitting that next level. And I equate it the same way. I think the moments when you're stung, when you're like, shit, what did I just say? Like, what? And you feel that defensiveness because you've been called out, or you made some unconscious bias and someone's told you about it, is jarring, but it's growth. And now to see it as acutely as I have about someone who I love so dearly as my wife is at its best a lot of opportunities for growth in terms of perspective from my point of view about all the things that I've missed and just not seen. And
I want to give the audience a chance to do one question.
Oh, that's fine.
One question. There we go, right there. Let's go right there. Unless I'm too late.
Oh, this is you were right, it was fast.
Yeah, I told you.
Okay, you can ask me questions on Twitter if you didn't get to, and I'll
Oh, wait, we already have a question. Okay, sorry, we'll go right here. Sorry.
Okay.
Didn't mean to steal your question.
Hi, I'm Binta. I'm an artist, and I really love your work and what you're talking about.
Me?
The Bay Bridge is behind you guys, like this photo, and it makes me think about the internet, and that's an abstract of data, that light installation that flows on it. It's responding to waves and turning them into light. And I just wonder, like, the internet now is really, I feel like, at an early stage, like what you were saying, where instead of, there's no FM, it's like AM only, and we're ego-driven. But what about when data becomes smart enough to actually irrigate our everyday experience, our energy, how we live? So I'm wondering if you could talk about what you think are future applications of the internet, because right now we have one that's much more on clickbait and things like that. And are there any companies or people out there doing things that you think shows that future?
Well, so I do try to think about all this now through the lens of having a child, because it has just made me less selfish, and so I'll answer it that way, which is I want her to inherit an internet that really is the best of us. And literally one of the companies I just started incubating probably 6 months ago is doing some really clever AI and ML work to basically win the arms race against harassment online and be able to create really, really smart moderator tools that could ultimately be paid for as a service by all the top social platforms. Like Facebook and Google can throw money at the problem and they still can't solve it. But for all these other companies, it's a constant arms race that you're always losing. And artificial intelligence and machine learning has gotten to a point now where we can actually do some really clever work. It used to just be you give them a list of words that are banned, and then eventually they realize, okay, that word is banned, so we're just going to replace it with an asterisk. And then you can kind of keep playing this cat and mouse game, but eventually they decide, okay, we're just going to use the word light bulb. And whenever we say kill the light bulbs, we in this community know what that means. And so that's when we reached a breaking point, and we're just now starting to get these tools in place to be able to know when that's happening and snuff it out. And so there is a future of the internet that has a constant presence of software curating our experience. And I do think there is a very real need for that, right? To curb the harassment, to curb a lot of the stuff we don't want. The other side of it, though, is this really is an arms race. And so the bad actors in this world will also eventually get some version of those tools, and they will be able to curate their experience as well. And this is where I think this is an important part of the solution. That's why I'm putting a lot of money and time to help try to make this part happen. But I also know that there's a part of this that still has to be human and still has to involve conversation and communication, because it can't just end up with all of us on our own little internet, our own little experience. And I worry about that. I think about that a lot. I spent way too much time on the internet as a kid, and I'm fortunate it worked out. But the internet was far less immersive and far less sort of addictive than it is today, because the tools have just gotten so much better. And so I keep going back to, I think there has to be human connection that ultimately lets us get to experience the best of all of this, because I do think most people are good people, and I've got enough data points now to really believe that. I'm
going to cut you off there before
I'm not done.
I think too much about
Okay. There is
whether
a
people are
stadium.
actually good people.
There is like even on a platform with hundreds of millions of users, the problematic actors are actually basically, you could basically put them all in a football stadium, under 100,000 people. It's just, they have such an outsized impact because of their tenacity, because of their vulgarity, because of all the et ceteras. And half of them are probably Russian bots anyway. But if I can give you any hope, it is that the number of truly vile people there online are actually very small relative to the rest of us. And it's important to remember that. And at its core, it's important to remember the person sitting across from you on the subway or the bus is actually not a monster. And that's forever. That's like the billboard thing I want everyone to know. But we're going to continue to go off into our own worlds until there has to be some kind of reunion for us as a society. And I hope the internet can be a part of it and not a problem.
Thank you so much, Alexis.
No,
thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
And now, here to talk about humanity in the age of AI, Sean Gorley, the founder and CEO of Primer, Raman Chowdhury, global lead for responsible AI at Accenture, and Richard Socher, chief scientist at Salesforce. Here to lead the conversation is the Atlantic senior tech editor, Ellen Cushing.
Hi, guys.
Aloha.
Hey. Thank you all for being here. Let's start with the promise of AI. All of you are working on very novel projects and interesting projects. What is exciting to you in the field right now?
You go. Kick it off.
All right. How about we go in order? Richard, why don't you?
All right. I'm super excited about AI on many different levels. So on the one hand, I'm most excited about the whole spectrum that it covers, and that it goes from really what tells us, something that tells us what makes us human, which is to a large degree our intelligence. So it's almost philosophical, and it will change the entire human condition, just like agriculture changed the entire human condition from hunting and gathering and that kind of level. And then it spans the spectrum all the way to being directly useful in products, in medicine, in agriculture, in, of course, like sales service marketing, where, in both positive ways. And I'm very excited about AI for good applications. We can help analyze our oceans better with artificial intelligence. We can find new drugs and develop new kinds of molecules. So it really spans pretty much every single industry. And I'm excited about the breadth that sometimes the same underlying techniques can actually have in terms of their applications.
So I'm going to take the sort of philosophical nature up a notch a little bit and say that the most interesting thing about AI is that it makes us question very fundamental things that we were unable to question before. For example, why is our GDP structured the way it is? Do we actually really have to work? Why do we not take care of elderly people and children as much as maybe we'd like to in our lives, right? Do we actually have to have a 40-hour plus week? Does my commute have to be so long? So we get to relearn and re-ask very fundamental questions that our society has been built on. Now, that's not necessarily the way it's headed, and it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion of the technology. It's why I have the job I do is in responsible AI. It's actually to push us and nudge us in that direction. So rather than thinking about the technology just as a way of automating things or getting flashy new tech, let's actually think about it as a fundamental force of nature and a way of just changing everything we do. And that I think is the most exciting thing about AI.
Look, I think for me, the most exciting piece of AI is really that it thinks differently to us. And I think that we get to create this intelligence that's sort of like not human. And I think we've been so used to kind of having human kind of perspective on the world. And all of a sudden, there's this intelligence that can do things that we can't. Now, it doesn't mean it's necessarily smarter than us, but it certainly can do things that we can't do. And in a sense, we're going to have to make friends with this new kind of intelligence that we are different to, that we've suddenly kind of got on the scene and all of a sudden has these capabilities that we don't have. And for me, that's incredibly exciting. Of course, it's a little bit scary, but we get to kind of, see how another intelligence observes the world. And, my background as a physicist, we'd always come up against the limits of what we knew about what the world, how the world worked. And to have another intelligence out there that could see things that we can't see or be able to explain things that we couldn't biologically do is incredibly exciting. So I think, coming into this, for all the kids that are coming into the world today, there's going to be an intelligence that is smarter than them on a bunch of things that is going to be able to tell them a whole range of things about how the world is.
And maybe to riff on that, I think the most interesting manifestation of human intelligence is probably language. Like animals have visual intelligence too, they have motor control, they can do some rudimentary planning and things like that, but no other animal has a language as complex as ours. So in terms of the research that we do in our research group, I'm really excited about natural language processing, basically trying to automatically improve translation, summarization, question answering, understanding the sentiment on social media. There's so many different exciting natural language processing applications that AI has made a huge amount of progress in the last couple of years.
So what are some applications that all of us might have in our pockets right now?
So one thing that we're working on directly are chatbots, and an Einstein voice assistant is what we call it, where you can walk out of a meeting and you can just dictate everything about that meeting and like follow-ups you need to do and things like that, and it will just do the speech recognition, then do the natural language processing, extract the important entities, and then it can update your database for you. And that takes a lot of annoying part out of using a CRM away, because you don't have to go back to your desk and type it all up. You can just do it as you walk out of the meeting. And so I think what's exciting about AI and NLP applications is that it will allow you to scale certain capabilities that we just currently cannot scale. Like, not everybody can have a personal assistant. We'd need twice the people in the world for each person to have an assistant, and the assistant wants an assistant, and it doesn't really work, right? And so...
I hate it when my assistant wants an assistant.
And so with AI, there's certain kinds of tasks, at least, obviously not all kinds of tasks, but certain tasks that AI can do for us. So I'm pretty sure in the next couple of years, when you call your insurance company and you have some question about a claim, you don't have to say like, oh, press 3 when you want this and 4 when you want that. You just say what you want, and you get an answer that is right. And so I think it'll, and then you can use those same kinds of ideas to basically schedule like your next vacation and all these kinds of things, and have AI to help you do a lot of things that are basically not fun. And I think maybe last point, the tricky bit there is that sometimes those things are current people's jobs, like driving. And when I think we look into the past, now nobody here in the room is bummed out that they weren't working in the field, like today, because those are not fun jobs. And we just like, when tractors came around, people are like, whoa, what else are we going to do? This is all we knew. Now the tractor is going to automate that. And I think in 100 years from now, we'll probably think about that similarly to like what we think now about truck driving, where for most people probably in 100 years, truck driving is also not that fulfilling of your job. You sit by yourself on the road, you go on the streets straight in the US for sometimes hundreds of miles. It's not that fulfilling and fun of a job, and I think AI will kind of make us rethink those jobs.
So thinking about AI that's in your pocket, and also thinking about what's coming next with AI, one of the most exciting things, I think, is AI plus. So AI plus AR and VR. It's going to be really...
What are AR and VR?
AR, augmented reality, VR, virtual reality, right? So especially augmented reality. So the new iPhones actually have better augmented reality capabilities, meaning that, and there are plenty of people in San Francisco who work in this space, slowly we will see this melding of the virtual and the real. And so one really basic example would be something like Pokemon Go, right? If you had like the app on your phone, and you can play it, and it looks like there's like, Pikachu sitting over there, and it's cute and it's fun, but you can really imagine how you might start to think about that in terms of having a meeting with your team, or imagine FaceTime being like, as if you could see your family, in 3 dimensions instead of just on a flat screen. So it is not necessarily in our pockets today, but the seeds of it are in our pockets today. And that I think will be something very exciting. Thinking about, as you were saying, about like the next generation growing up. I mean, most of us, I think some of us in this room, most of us in this room, hopefully, otherwise I'm pretty old, remember a pre-internet and post-internet, hopefully, yeah. Okay, we all remember a pre-iPhone and post-iPhone era, but it just seems so natural. But to talk to people or kids who don't really remember a pre-smartphone era, or, you know, young adults who don't really remember a pre-internet era, it's like, but it all just happens so seamlessly, and it seems so easy and integrated, and I think that's going to be the next seamless, easy integration that's going to make us all feel much older.
Yeah, it was following a thread on Twitter, and it was this question. It was like, what did you all do before the internet when you had like
When you had a question,
When you had a question, and it was like this whole litany of stuff. It's like, I don't know. I guess we just
encyclopedias.
we talked about it, and and then we were like, I guess we won't know till tomorrow. And it was just like
we just lived ignorant.
It was like,
Scratched our heads
it
until we died.
was like, I don't know, how high is Mount Kilimanjaro? I guess we won't know until I go to the library. And it's just this kind of like, it seems like perverse. It's like, well, of course we know, it's on the phone. I've got it, right? So the next thing is going to be like, you know, what's it going to be like having to, ask and you know, a more complex question like, you know, tell me, how is Syria going to unfold in the next 12 months? And be like, imagine when we didn't know how that was going to happen, right? You know, and so it's that kind of like thing as AI evolves and it moves up from being a sort of a basic librarian to being able to kind of take information, actually synthesize it, figure out what's going on, maybe even start to predict the things that are unfolding next, and then give that back to you in the form of an assistant in your pocket. We'll be, you know, in 10 years' time having that same question. Remember when we didn't know that you know, what was going to happen in Syria?
So how would AI know what's going to happen in Syria? Walk me through that. I would love to know.
Good question. So it's interesting. So one of the things that we as humans, when we observe the world, we observe it through a very narrow lens, which is dictated by the biological constraints that the brain has, right? So things that look very messy to us or very chaotic are often actually quite structured at a higher level that we can't actually observe. So you start building AIs and training them to observe the world at a superhuman level, all of a sudden they observe patterns. And so one of the patterns that's observed, this is work that I did my PhD in, was around the kind of the patterns of violence as it unfolds in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And there's actually very, very strong patterns in both the timing and the size and the geographic diffusion of violence that are actually quite predictable. But when you're on the ground there, they seem chaotic. And so it's interesting, right? You build these systems that can see beyond human capabilities to tell you things you wouldn't otherwise have seen. And that's kind of where that dynamic, and I think the world actually has a lot more of these. I think the world is a lot more repeatable than we observe, but it seems like, you know, us as little kind of pieces of a Brownian motion kind of buffered in kind of statistical physics, right?
I mean, that's basically how most of data science and AI, most of the companies in Silicon Valley are built on the concept of predictive modeling, right? I use data, I put it into an algorithm, I make a prediction about someone's behavior, whether it's these might be the shoes you're going to buy, this might be the movie you want to watch, but imagine that sort of applied at a bigger scale, and that's why we're having the conversations we're having today about AI and ethics. We've moved beyond making, not just making predictions, but nudging behavior, like sort of implying that somebody should do something, but that's now moving into things like making decisions about whether you can have a loan to buy a house. So things that are more impactful than just consumerism.
And then the stuff there, the bit there was a paper that was published in Nature. It was around looking at, remember this, the images of eyes, and they were looking for defects in the eyes.
Yeah.
And the machine that was trained could recognize the gender of someone looking at the iris. And human doctors looked at that and said, there's no way you can do that. It doesn't exist. And the machine's like, no, you know, at 90+% precision and recall on this, we've got it. And we still don't quite know what they were seeing, right? Or there was even a difference. And this is something that, you know, the machines are going to learn things about the world that we never knew. And it's going to be teaching us back and we're going, good work, machine.
So let's talk a little bit about algorithmic bias. I know this is something that you all have run into in your professional lives. You know, AI is only as good as the way we make it, and how do we create a sort of set of ethics and rules for this moving forward as it becomes something that is more and more opaque to us?
I think it doesn't make sense to think about AI in the abstract like that and like to try to regulate all of AI or the fundamental research, but it does make sense to regulate AI as it touches human lives in specific areas. So if you apply AI to medicine, you want to have FDA, Food Drug Administration, to basically regulate what can be done automatically with an AI. If you want to have self-driving cars, you have to have transportation authorities to regulate and develop tests before you would allow a self-driving car to drive on the road. And that continues, and hopefully there will be a lot of regulation when it comes to military use, which unfortunately we don't have to work on, but some people probably will, and there will be hopefully better be regulations around that. So I think we have to relook at AI plus X, and then when you look into it, you have to realize that AI is only as good as not as we make it, but as the training data sort of provides. And so if the training data has, for instance, not given in the past as many women alone to start a business, and then you train on that historic training data, then the algorithm might also say, well, I don't want to, you shouldn't give this woman alone to start a business. And so you need to understand the kinds of data sets that are being fed into the AI to train, to learn, and then make sure you can combat that bias. And you can either do it by changing your training data set, by finding more diverse inputs, or there's sometimes, in certain cases, algorithmic ways to improve the algorithms to actually get rid of some of the biases.
So I'm going to do a very, very quick like bias 101, right? So I work with researchers and then I work with industry people, and it's not like I'm always working with tech companies. I'm often working with people whose industries have nothing to do with technology. And here I am coming in talking about this concept of bias. And one thing I've realized is that the way data scientists, AI researchers, et cetera, the way we talk about bias and the way non-researchers, et cetera, even just lay people talk about bias, actually very different. For us, bias is often a quantifiable value. It is measurable. And what's very safe, because it's a very safe thing when something's measurable, because then I can try to figure out how to fix it. And most of us in my space, we spend our time trying to fix this measurable bias. But then there's this other half of bias, and it is just the fact that the world is an unfair place, and shitty things happen to people, and the world is structured unfair. People are not born equal. People are not treated equally. Now, there is no way to measure that. There is no way to fix that with an algorithm. And the best way to fix that is actually to just be better people and to just create better systems, understanding that that is actually going to be a limitation of our AI. So as Richard said, it will only be as good as the training data. In other words, it will only be as good as the society that has produced it. So we have to recognize that. So yes, we can do this thing where we measure bias and we fix that one half of it, but the other half of it comes from what you were saying, Alan, this concept of having a good culture, good ethical codes, et cetera, and a good way of implementing it where we're being thoughtful human beings. So back to kind of what I was saying at the very beginning is that we have to re-examine very fundamental things. It is an imperative that we make a good society. It has always been an imperative that make good society, but more so today, because as we build technologies that will do these kind of amazing things that you were talking about, right? Giving us predictions about what will happen in a particular region of the world, or to, who may be the next president or something like that. We do have to make sure that we've sown the seeds and we've started with a good place to start from. Otherwise, we're just going to be perpetuating bias that already exists, and also we're going to make it even harder and harder to fix it and detect it.
So can we have good AI, can we have good AI in the absence of a good society?
No.
Should we all agree on this?
In the end, AI is a tool. In the end, AI is a tool, right? So and again, it's hard to talk about in the abstract. There's a company that just counts red and white blood cells. That's just it's just a good application, right? And you can have AI algorithms that classify different types of breast cancer. And yeah, those are good applications, even if the society has issues, right? And so it is possible, but it's, again, very specific applications that you have to look at.
But even thinking of the medical example, right? There was a something I was talking about how black men in the U.S. get prostate cancer, and they're the highest demographic, and yet all the training sets were majority white men, right? So even in the medical, something that seems impartial, like medicine, and actually, Alexis Ohanian was just up here talking about the difficulties that Serena, that his wife had during childbirth, and her unfortunate situation put a spotlight on the fact that Black women are not treated the same. And in fact, we know that women with heart disease are not treated the same as men. So even things that seem objective, actually when you boil down to it, it's always a function of the human condition and the way we treat each other. So even something like medical diagnoses can be flawed because humans are flawed, doctors are flawed.
And I think it's interesting, you think about this, and we have this debate, right? Can you make these algorithms less biased? And I think the bit that goes, it's always kind of a strange conversation, right? Because we have this in a society that is incredibly biased, right? So we're sitting in a society which is evidently not equal by any means. And we're sitting here and saying, well, what we need to do is create algorithms that are going to have no biases. And I think the two of those have to go together, right? If we're going to like build algorithms that have biases reduced, it's very, very hard to deploy them in any meaningful way in a society that has incredible amounts of bias. So I don't think you can separate this out. In some ways, like maybe we can pat ourselves on the back and feel good about building an algorithm that has removed bias, while we kind of come to work every day stepping over people on the streets that have been treated very, very differently as a result of their socioeconomic standing, right? So I think this kind of dynamic is something we've got to do from a societal perspective, and you can't isolate just the algorithmic component and say, we'll just solve that and things will be fine.
But on the positive side, one thing that these algorithms do for us is it highlights bias. It actually gives us evidence. So while maybe everybody in this room agrees that women and men do not get equal pay at work and they are not hired, particularly in the tech industry, at equal rates, there are plenty of people who do disagree with that and who may point to their version of science
Because if we had in some ways an equal society and we were training algorithms on top of that, a lot of the work would be done.
Right, but
because a lot of the errors of the algorithms come from encoding the biases that we have in our world today.
Right, but what the algorithm is able to do then is give us irrefutable evidence that it does exist, which sometimes we spend our time trying to even defend our right to exist and make the case that we're making. So we have to start from down here every time. So how are we supposed to make large-scale changes in the system if I have to start every conversation by trying to prove my point? Well, now actually what an algorithm can do for us if we wield it intelligently is to say, now we can highlight the biases that exist because we're using, to your point earlier, this sort of I use the word objective, meaning almost third party, right? This sort of non-socially conditioned method, this mathematical method to show the biases. So it's a moral mirror. It's illustrating our own problems. And now that we started from that point, every conversation doesn't have to start down here. Now at least we can start a little bit higher.
So before we go to questions, the name of this event is What's Next? And I'm curious to hear what you guys think is next in AI.
I'll start on that. Look, I think the big AI advances are going to be driven by dollars, right? And so one of the ones that kind of stays off the radar on that, but I think is going to have a huge amount, and we're already seeing it, of investment is in the military space, and particularly with China and the US kind of getting into an arms race around dollars spent around artificial intelligence. That's going to drive tremendous amounts of work and research, and we're going to see a huge kind of adoption of AI into the defense sector. And I would posit that the next conflict that will unfold between two nation states will be driven by the existence of AI, and the group that has the strongest AI will win that. And so I think very, very clearly we're going to move into a place where AI is going to impact and shape the geopolitical landscape of the world vis-a-vis China and the US.
So I'm trying to think of how optimistic I'm feeling. So should I go optimistic or pessimistic?
You could do both.
Should I do both? All right. So I'll keep it real, she says. All right. So I'm gonna start pessimistic and say that if not wielded correctly, then all these advances in technology that we're seeing will have a further divide between the haves and have-nots. It is really lovely to read about people going to space and colonizing Mars and, trying to gene edit babies not have Alzheimer's. But guess what? Unless we create a world in which everybody has access to these technologies, we will literally in utero be creating better human beings for the people who can afford it. Mars travel, guess what? It's not meant for you and me, buddy, right? They're going to fly off to Mars and leave us poors behind, right? right? That's me being very pessimistic. Like that is super pessimistic, Ramon. So more optimistic, Ramon says that artificial intelligence will actually allow us access to things that we never had access to before. Data, information, education. I mean, there's some amazing strides being made in education. And interestingly, so at NeurIPS, which is sort of one of the big AI conferences, there was a huge issue with researchers from Africa trying to get visas to go, because Canada is very, very unnecessarily, some would say, strict on researchers from Africa. And even though they had literally like AI household names writing them letters telling the Canadian government to grant them visas, they were being told no. And what that was highlighting is, A, the fact that the democratization of these skills is global, it's universal, and that's a very beautiful thing. But the second thing it's showing us is that our political institutions, our global structures are straining against this because they actually can't handle it. Globalization obviously transcends these boundaries, as education transcends these boundaries, and now we're pushing the boundaries and pushing the borders. And it's amazing. So it's Dr. Timnit Gebru who was working on getting visas for these students, and it was great that she was able to use social media to evangelize for her cause and gain support. So optimistic Ramon says that AI gives us the ability to learn and to share and to just push institutions to be better.
So I think we'll have to separate sort of the hype from reality in terms of both the positives and the negatives. So on the hype side, I don't think we're anywhere close to what we call artificial general intelligence, some kind of conscious, self-conscious entity that is more intelligent than humans in all kinds of ways, and will hence decide on its own goals of what to do, and then maybe decide to wipe out the human race. I think that is sci-fi. It's interesting sci-fi. I like watching Terminator 2, but it's just like sci-fi, you know. It's like all the, you know, zombies will come when cancer research happens, and like it's cool sci-fi. Sometimes those movies are entertaining, but it's just fiction. And so that comes with both positives and negatives. Like some people are so optimistic that they think AI will just automate all the things, and we don't have to work, and we'll have this amazing wonderland. And you're going to go into negative, where they worry that it will kill us all, right? And it's an existential threat to humankind. So much more realistically so, I do think AI will actually impact pretty much every job that there is, from agriculture, and you know, there are already companies that can drive over fields. Blue River, that was acquired maybe a year or two ago, they can drive over fields and pick lettuce leaves just when they're ripe at the right time. They can water them the right way. They can get weeds around them automatically for each lettuce leaf and pick the weeds around them to not have to use as many pesticides and so on. So there's a lot of stuff you can do in just agriculture, and then, you know, going to a very expensive job like radiology or medicine, there's also a lot of things we can do. And in those kinds of application areas, most people would care more about creating healthier patients more quickly and cheaply with, you know, high quality, rather than creating more jobs in medicine, right? You want to just make the outcome better, and I think AI has the potential to do a lot of that. Now, it's true that just like with DNA sequencing and stuff, I think a lot of the most modern technology will often first be available for a few rich old white guys, and then maybe come and be cheaper, right? The first DNA sequencing cost over $1 million, and now you can get it for less than 100. And so I think AI will realistically become a very powerful tool in basically all these industries. And in terms of positive and negative, I agree with everything that Ramon said. I think we're very aligned. Unfortunately, it's a tool that's only as good as the people and societies and an infrastructure that uses it, and hence it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. It's basically an omni-use kind of technology.
Yep.
Do we have any questions?
I hope so.
I can't see.
In the middle, there's one.
Yes.
Maybe just yell it out and we'll repeat it.
I've got the microphone.
Oh, great. Even better.
My name is Alexis, most popular name of the night, and I actually work for Accenture. So my question is that I get the sense that there's this mass fear that the robots are going to kill us all and or take all of our jobs, right? And that is one extreme that AI does have the ability to do in the far future. However, to Alexis Ohanian's point earlier about the benefit of AI being able to take away those sort of jobs basically that people don't want to do, the mundane things, the non-regular jobs that we just voluntarily don't want to do in order to make our lives easier, seems like a more practical application, and that would suggest to me that maybe the ideal melding of the two, of human interaction leading AI, would be best. And so my question is, what do you see as the optimal melding of human brain capacity using artificial intelligence?
I mean, in some ways, it's imagine like you work in service, and every day you pick up a call, and somebody again asks like, "How do I recover my password? I can't log into my account." And you're like, "I've answered this like 100 times." I think people will get very annoyed if they have to, in the future of work, repeat the same task hundreds of times. They're like, why has this not been picked up by the AI yet? I think is what people will think. And we'll see a continuous sort of co-adaptation also, where if you want the AI to work, you're going to maybe, speak more clearly into the microphone if you want, some AI assistant to do something for you. So we have this co-adaptation and see less and less repetitive work and more like, oh, this is an interesting new problem. I don't know how to solve this. Let me go through your logs and see what's going on. And I think that is kind of the ideal melding, where AI feels like it's empowering you to do your job better and focus on the more interesting and creative and unique kinds of tasks.
So I'm going to Jekyll Hyde this again. So, so I totally agree. So the goal of AI, and it has to be a very conscious thing, like the phrase that gets tossed around all the time is human-centric. Like, what the hell does human-centric even mean? But really, it is to create AI in the image of humans. So I'll give you an example. Like, often, and we all do this, we will adjust ourselves to the technology. So if you have an Alexa or something at home, do you ever find yourself speaking like this? Like short sentences, baby words, right? And we are getting primed to actually adjust ourselves to the technology when it really should be adjusting to us, and that's the direction that hopefully a lot of this technology is heading. Now, that was the good half. The bad half. So I understand this narrative of we want to automate mundane jobs, but for all of us, we must be at a special point of privilege if we want to say, I want to automate some mundane, like nobody wants to work. Well, actually, millions of people do work at call centers. And it's not to say that they love their jobs and they wake up every morning like, woohoo, but you know what? It feeds their family. It puts a roof over their head. And if we are going to have a narrative of, getting rid of mundane jobs, then we have to think deeply about what we will do to enable those people whose jobs will be wiped out. And the thing is, the balance, going back to this concept of globalization, the balance will not look equal, right? We won't see it in our backyards. We're not even going to see it in most of America. It will be in the Philippines, it will be in India, it'll be in the global south, where people often don't have a voice. So, it is our response. I do believe in this AI future where we're able to automate things more, et cetera, but we can't do it and just raise over the people who have been picking our fruits and vegetables, answering our calls, and doing all the things that we consider mundane because we are privileged to have jobs that we find fulfilling.
Well said.
I think it's interesting when we look at this stuff, I think artificial intelligence its goal is not to mimic humans. I think if all we did with artificial intelligence was mimic humans, we would have probably squandered one of the greatest inventions we've ever made. I think what's interesting about artificial intelligence as it evolves is that it's different to us. It thinks differently, it sees differently, it does things we can't do. So we're in a little bit of a place where we just, take it as like, new technology, let's replicate the things that we've just had. But I think we need to push it beyond that. And for me, that's kind of, I think it's a symbiosis of human intelligence with machine intelligence. And I think if you combine them together, you actually can get a higher intelligence than either one had by themselves. And my favorite example of this is in the world of weather prediction. And the people at NOAA keep incredible records of prediction. And of course, they have some of the biggest supercomputers in the world, and if not the biggest set of supercomputers. It's a very difficult problem. And so they measure two things. One is they measure, of course, did it rain or not? But the second thing they measure is how well was the performance of the machine before a human, and then how well was the performance after the human. And what they've found consistently since the mid-90s when they started measuring this stuff was around a 10 to 15% delta on what the humans could add to the best machines. And I think inside of that is, I think really the essence here is that if we can interact with machines in the right way, we will be smarter than the machine and we'll be smarter than ourselves. And we're going into a world where we need all of the intelligence we can get. And so I think it's on us to really design that interaction in a way that lifts that intelligence, both with our individual reactions, but also collectively as we interact. And as we come together as collective intelligences and machines and humans, how do we ensure we have the smartest group and crowd rather than the dumbest one? And I think often we've designed systems where we end up in a really dumb place when we've brought intelligences together. So it's on us to make all of that interaction the smartest we can possibly make it. And I think that's where we take the benefit of both sides.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.